The Far Quest, The Chronicles of Cursoon, Book 1, by R. Jason Lynch, copyright 2016, EMP 2023, all rights reserved. Chapter 20, Camping in Miremurk. Cursoon and Tipplglee followed their stagnant little stream for several hours, and with every step, what little light that managed to find its way into the bog seemed to slowly grow dimmer and dimmer until it finally vanished entirely. This left the two travelers in almost absolute darkness. With the coming of night, Cursoon began to feel a great deal of anxiety, and so, when Tipplglee suddenly stopped to make camp, the bard began to argue.
"Wouldn't it be better to walk on in the dark?"
Cursoon reasoned, and then, to lend credence to his desire, he added,
"After all, we have only a year and a day to finish our quest and return again."
If we go on, we'll stumble over every broken tree and every slimy stone. It'll matter none how much time you have if we fall and break our necks entirely.
Tipplglee replied with no hint that the matter was open for debate. Cursoon glanced about the broken forest. Its eerie silence seemed to be closing in upon him.
"To be honest, I don't think I can sleep in this place,"
the bard admitted.
Surely you're not afraid.
The little man growled with a slightly surprised tone as he unrolled his sleeping sack. Tipplglee took out his tinderbox from inside the roll. After opening the small cedar container and taking out his friction wheel, he glanced up at the fretful bard.
You've met the most frightful thing in this wood, and she's who sent you on this silly quest to prove yourself right.
He shook his head and gave his friction wheel a spin. Cursoon stood gazing with momentary disbelief at the little man. To his astonishment, he found that the other's words actually made sense.
"You're right. What else is there to fear?"
he asked with a small laugh. With that matter resolved, the bard took off his pack and began untying his sleeping sack as well. Once Tipplglee had the fire brightly glowing, Cursoon felt even better about sleeping. Its warm glow sent a small grin to the bard's bearded face, and in that moment, he began to realize just how tired he really was. Tipplglee went to a nearby patch of dead grass and rolled out his sleeping sack. Sitting on the sack, the little man took out his small, round wooden flask and tried it for a drink, but as before, he found nothing inside. Grumbling to himself, he roughly replaced its cork. As Cursoon followed Tipplglee's example and unrolled his own sleeping sack out in the same patch of grayish-yellow grass, he remarked,
"I'm terribly hungry but too weary to cook."
In response, the little man only grunted his agreement.
"Wait!" the bard nearly shouted. "The wife of Guileless gave me a cake."
However, the bard's voice quickly shifted to a tone of disappointment.
"Oh, I forgot. It's been in my bag all this time. Surely it's been soiled with all I've been through."
Tipplglee frowned and gazed at him expectantly. But when Cursoon made no move to find the cake and inspect its condition, the little man growled.
Well, don't just sit there. Have a peek at it, lad, and see if we've any luck.
Cursoon sighed, nodded, and felt down into his pack. After a second of groping, he brought out a smashed bundle wrapped in wax paper. Immediately, the bard was crestfallen.
It's not the shape that matters. It's the taste.
Tipplglee growled. Cursoon bobbed his head in agreement and then opened the wrapping.
"It's not soiled in the least,"
he declared with a bright smile as he offered the smaller man half of the cake.
It's about time a little luck came our way,
Tipplglee said with a grunt of appreciation as he took the large piece. The cake was delicious, and it sent a little more gladness into the two men's hearts as they ate. When they had finished the cake, they both laid back upon their beds and stared up into the tangled limbs over their heads. The campfire's amber glow danced among the branches, and somehow this was also comforting to Cursoon. It was as if they were back in his father's hall, where the light of the fire in the center hearth danced on the overarching beams of the hall's ceiling. After removing his wooden-framed spectacles, llElevenLabs closed his squinty eyes and immediately fell fast asleep. This was clearly evident by the loud snoring that emanated from the little old man. However, this noise gave Kursun no trouble, for he was far too exhausted to notice. After tilting his colorful hat down over his eyes, he too drifted off into the land of dreams. The next morning, Kursun groaned and slowly opened his eyes. At first he thought he had awakened in the middle of the night, but as the fog of drowsiness cleared from his mind, he remembered where he was and why it was still somewhat dark. As he took in his surroundings, he found llElevenLabs awake with a frown of irritation upon his face. He was absent-mindedly poking the campfire with a stick.
"Oh, you're already awake,"
Kursun remarked with a note of surprise. llElevenLabs only nodded silently. In that moment, the bard noticed that the little man's hands were shaking. His wooden flask lay nearby, and Kursun realized that llElevenLabs must have checked it yet again, for the drink he knew was no longer inside. Considering these clues, the bard quickly guessed that it had been too long since llElevenLabs had taken a sip of whatever drink his small body craved. Kursun exaggerated a grimace.
"Well, I don't know about you, but my back won't let me sleep another wink on this hard ground."
He turned and began to rummage through his pack.
Old Tizane had a terrible tasting tea that could help with a stiff back. I think I'll brew some, but if it's all the same to you, I'll make my own version. It tastes much better. Would you like a cup?
Without a word, llElevenLabs slightly shook his head.
He also had another tea that helped with tremors. I could brew a cup of that tea while I'm making my own.
Kursun added without looking at the older man. llElevenLabs' magnified eyes grumpily cut over at the bard, but when he saw that the younger man was still searching his bag, his irritated expression softened. After a moment more, the little old man mumbled,
"I suppose a cup of tea would be grand. Whatever kind you might be brewing,"
he added stiffly. Kursun brought out from his bag a small, shiny copper teapot and a book with a wooden cover.
"You do remember what I told you about Tizane and his smelly old tome?"
The bard inquired as he held up his own book. llElevenLabs nodded with a shrug of indifference.
"You may not recall this, but after our visit to your lord's castle in Blackthorn, I grew very ill. My father was so worried about me that we never went to Whitewall. Instead, he rushed me back home, and when we got there, only one person knew how to help me. Tizane brewed a special tea for me, and after I drank it, I felt much better. So, even though I had been angry with the old wizard, I soon forgot my grudge and asked him to teach me to be a brew mixer too."
Kursun removed the lid of the teapot, filled it with water from his water skin, and then set it in the coals of the fire. Having done all this, he took up his book again, and while turning through its pages, he continued telling his story.
Tizane had many remedies written down in his stinky old tome, but they were all recorded in runic. Moreover, they all tasted terrible. One day, I asked why every potion tasted so bad. He said,
"If they tasted good, my patients would never believe I have the power to heal them."
He may have been right. I suppose some people expect medicine to taste bad.
At this, Kursun chuckled to himself.
As the old wizard's apprentice, it often fell to me to brew whatever remedies his patients needed. And so, as I mixed the ingredients, I secretly performed experiments of my own in which I took out the fouler elements. In this way, I discovered that all the cures were found in the plants, and not in the more exotic ingredients, things such as the eye of a newt, a bat's wing, or even the little toe of a dead man. These changes had one other happy result. They greatly improved the taste of every potion.
As he spoke, the bard pulled 2 cups out of his pack and placed a square of fine white linen down into each. Next, he took 7 pinches of ground herbs from a small jar marked with the number 14, and while rubbing the herbs between his finger and thumb, he let these pinches fall into the cloth. After that, he pulled another jar from his bag. This one was marked with the number 23, and from it, He put another 7 pinches into the cloth of the second cup. Just as he finished, the teapot began to whistle. And so, the bard poured the hot water over the mix of herbs in the linen pieces of cloth and then let it steep for a while. When he was sure the tea was ready, he carefully removed the cloth from the cups, thus leaving the tea behind while taking the grounds away. With all this done, Cure soon passed one of the cups to Tippleglee. The little man did not even bother letting it cool, but started drinking immediately.
Doesn't that burn your mouth?
The bard gasped with concern. Tippleglee only shrugged and went on sipping his hot tea. Unlike the other man, Cure soon blew over his cup to cool it a bit. After taking a careful sip, the bard admitted,
It tastes better with a drop of honey.
Tippleglee shrugged.
It tastes just fine to me.
When they finished their tea, Cure soon held out his open book to the smaller man.
I wrote all the improved recipes down in my own journal, but instead of writing them in the runic script, I wrote them in the common tongue, and I even drew sketches of each plant.
Pointing at the number 23 written upon the page, the bard said,
I also numbered each cure, and put the corresponding number on the cork of the jar that holds the herbs needed for that particular remedy. That way, if someone was ill, and I happened to be indisposed for whatever reason, then anyone could brew the potion needed.
Cure soon held out the little glass jar and pointed at the 23 written upon its cork lid. Tippleglee nodded approvingly. After breaking camp, the two men returned to following the small, stagnant stream. They had walked for nearly an hour when Tippleglee suddenly realized that he actually felt much better. He said nothing of this to the bard, but the old little man visibly relaxed, and his continuous grumbling lessened to its normal levels. Cure soon was leading the way, and so, with his back to Tippleglee, the little man could not see the knowing smile that grew upon the bard's bearded face.